the 2020 Chevrolet Silverado Trail Boss LT. Now with a name like that, you know it's going to be premium. In fact, the Silverado is one of the most important products for Chevrolet. Since its last update in 2018, they have sold nearly 1.2 million of these. And the truck segment now is as competitive as ever. So let's see how this thing stacks up with some of its competition.
Don't you just get tired chasing fame and being pretty all the time? Doesn't sound like fun. You can do better. Let me show you what a good time looks like. You can do better, so much better. I don't fit into your box. Beauty queens without no flaws. You can do better. I dare you to be wilder. I don't fit into your box. Beauty queens without no flaws. You can do better. I dare you to be wilder.
First thing to bring up about this truck is the sheer interior utility. There is a ton of space in here. The rear seats get limo-like legroom, 3 full-size adults can fit back there, and the front seats themselves are so large and accommodating, you could be the size of a small hippopotamus and fit in here fine. There's also an unbelievable amount of cargo capacity in here. The door cards are enormous. The center console, while it is not as large as the bathtub you find in the Ram, you could still fit probably like 50 Costco-sized hot dogs in here, and you get dual glove boxes. The next thing to bring up is the interior electronics. If you've been in a GM product in the last 5 years, you're going to feel right at home. Thankfully, all the controls are within arm's reach. They're all physical and easy to use. The center gauge cluster is incredibly easy to read. All the information is there, and it's not intimidating. The other thing to bring up is the infotainment. Again, just like in the Chevy Equinox, it works very well. It's very quick to respond. Android Auto and Apple CarPlay both work great. However, the only negative is its relatively poor contrast. So if you get a lot of direct sunlight on it, like if you have a sunroof, you're going to struggle to be able to read it. The other thing to bring up is the sheer abundance of charging ports. You have both USB-C and regular USB ports, both in the center console area and on the dash. And you have both 110 charging outlets and regular cigarette vault style chargers as well. It is a very impressive cabin on that front. However, it is far from all sunshine and rainbows, so let's get into the back seat and talk about some of the negatives. I accept no product is going to be perfect, particularly in trucks. But there are definitely some things about this vehicle that are hard for me to accept. The first being the exterior styling. I understand that I'm not the arbiter of all things that look good. Heck, look at how I'm dressed. But I think the front end of this thing is, putting it nicely, polarizing. In the Trail Boss trim, they've gone for a really aggressive look. It's yell at your wife in the Applebee's parking lot mean. But once you put a lot of chrome on this thing, like it's found on the other trim levels, it is such an eyesore. The next thing to bring up is some of the interior quality. In a segment that is getting very competitive, look at the Ram. It is hard for me to accept that GM, with some of the best engineers in the world, look at the C8, look at the C7 Corvette, they can really build an impressive cabin, that they are okay putting some of these gumball-esque plastics in this vehicle, particularly at its price tag of, in the mid-50s to $60,000. The seats in this truck are pathetic. Yes, they fit all body types, but they are rock hard and have almost no adjustment to them. If you like a really hard bed, and I mean like 2 stones in a cave hard, you'll feel right at home in this thing. And then there's the audio system. I have bagged GM in the last 3 GM videos we've done. And the reason is, if you're gonna put a Bose name on a product, make it at least acceptable. The clarity is low. It is extremely bass heavy, and not in a good way. It's very boomy and very rattly. It's hard for me to swallow, and I feel bad for bagging on GM like this, but I know they can do better. So let's talk turkey and head to the shop. So Mark, we're underneath the Chevy Silverado Trail Boss, and this was all new for 2018 as a 2019 model year.
And previously I did a video on the past generation Silverado, and I didn't get too much into the technical details, but this is definitely worth covering some of it. So let's get started with that.
For GM, this is the single most important product they build. This is where all their money goes. This is how they make their money. And as the video I just watched claims, they put 10,000 people on this project.
And how many people in that 10,000 are involved in the marketing?
All of them.
But the joking aside, GM would not exist without this truck. That is how important. You kill this model and they go bankrupt.
And that's why they have 8 different trim levels. They break down their buyers in fleet, premium, and volume. But for the sake of this video and your time, we're just going to be talking about the Trail Boss. So before I talk about the innovations, I'm going to talk about what the Trail Boss is. You get the Z71 package, which is their off-road package standard. You get big wheels and tires, their off-roading tires, skid plates, and a locking diff. But past that, the core goodies of what make the Silverado are all still here. So when they updated this truck, they changed the entire body structure and suspension architecture. The suspension is noticeably different. You now have an aluminum upper control arm and an aluminum knuckle. Oh, so the geometry is different as well. And then the frame is much lighter than it used to be. The whole truck, apples to apples, a volume seller V8 compared to the prior gen, is now 400 pounds lighter.
Okay, and a lot of this is forced by innovation from other companies like Ram and the F-150 specifically. The F-150 catapulted the truck segment so far forward with advanced materials. So now to compete, GM has had to get smart about how they design a lot of this. So they can't just be putting the hugest components on just to put it there. So every single thing has been redesigned in terms of where can we cut weight out of it? What do we absolutely need here for rigidity in certain areas? Like the frame rail. It's not the same thickness across the entire frame rail. You don't need it to be, because where the lateral forces and all the load forces align, you put more material where it needs to be, where the flex is. And that's where all the computer design comes in, all the engineering. The upper control arm is forged aluminum to improve rigidity and save weight. So this helps with stabilizing alignment angles under load, compression, and this is raised up. So if you're going off-road, you have more rigidity in the hub, the knuckle, overall in the suspension. And what that translates to the driver is not much on daily driving, but under load and twisting forces, it feels like a much more substantial truck, or at least that's the idea behind it.
And by dropping weight and increasing torsional rigidity, they've also increased fuel economy and, theoretically, some of the ride quality.
All right, let's get under the hood and talk about some of the engine stuff.
So Mark, we've made it under the hood, and we get to see what GM does best, V8s. You get 2 different V8s with the Trail Boss LT, the 5.3, which this is, or the 6.2, which is real tough. Makes 420 horsepower, 460 foot-pounds of torque, and gets to 60 under 6 seconds.
That sounds like what I want. What other engine options are there?
You get 2 6-cylinder options, one with a turbo, one without, and a diesel.
What about the trans on this?
It's a 10-speed, but there are 8-speed variants in lesser trucks.
Okay.
This 10-speed is the same trans they developed with Ford. However, they have different tuning, and I think the tuning in this trans is far superior to the trans in the F-150.
Let's talk about cylinder deactivation, kind of the dirty word. So there's 2 different types of cylinder deactivation. One is a major innovation for GM, and the other one was designed the first design was in 2015, which was AFM, Active Fuel Management. And what this does is it shuts down certain cylinders to save fuel. So it goes from V8 to 4-cylinder. So if you've always wanted a 4-cylinder truck, you can have that. However, it should work, but in theory, for whatever reason, they have a problem with their design. The whole system revolves around having a plate sandwiched in there with solenoids that are pressurized from oil or oil pressure. And when you have problems with oil pressure, either too high or too low, or the solenoids fail, they can get into an open or half open state and basically shut down a cylinder, or prevent valves from opening or keeping them half open or not opening all the way. Some of this has to do if you let the oil level get too low, much like the Honda system is. The oil level gets too low, it doesn't work, and you burn down a cylinder. It overheats, you can cause oil burning, you can damage the cylinder head, the physical block, the pistons can, that part of the engine can deform, and the end users, what they get is either a blown engine, one that just burns, over 2 quarts of oil every 1,000 miles. And the worst part about that is after warranty or near the end of the warranty, GM isn't honoring it. They're saying it's totally normal, even though there's no way that it would pass a real emissions test, which is what I would love to see if you're burning 2 quarts of oil every 1,000 miles.
It's ludicrous, and particularly for a volume product. The 5.3, in some variation or another, has been around for a long, long time. And they've had forms of cylinder management for even longer than that, before 2015. And they've had this problem from day one.
Yeah, and I think this is the problem when you manufacture something, and it's not just GM, but when you make something in the millions per year or close to $1 million, the economics of what you do to fix that problem when you have that many of them out there become impossible. And it's just, in GM's case, they're like, we're not fixing it. We're going to either get sued or we're going to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But if you're Johnny Truckster and you're burning a bunch of oil and your engine's toast and you're out of warranty, you're screwed. They're not doing anything. And
that's my problem with this truck, is on paper, it's great. Really it is. This drivetrain is very impressive. But the reliability issues with these trucks rotting out historically.
Brake lines, rust, all that. So this truck, if you get a certain trim level, you get DFM, which is their new version of active cylinder management, which can vary the shutdown of any cylinder at any time based on the ECUs.
It's featured on this truck.
It's featured on this. It's a totally different version. And it's very advanced because it really can shut down any cylinder it wants to keep a better balance based on load, all the algorithms that it uses to manage that. Now the question is, it's new for this year, or 2019 technically, and we're not sure how much of a problem it is or it's not going to be. And Chevy does not give you an ability to turn it off. So you have to go to the aftermarket either for OBD2 dongles or a complete ECU reflash, which is just, it's the modern age of cars and trucks, man.
But you can still get the AFM motor if you really want as well.
If you really want to have burning oil issues and solenoid problems, pick that one up in the lower trims. But that's enough talking about this stuff. Let's head out onto the road and see how it drives.
All right. So Mark, we're in a red Chevy Silverado. Bet you feel real American with your McDonald's.
Yeah, I had to represent. With the shutdown, though, the menu is so limited, I couldn't get a triple cheese.
So what are you eating?
Well, we got a soy burger here with a soy bun, soy poppy seeds, soy mayonnaise.
That's not very American of you, Mark.
So tell me.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about the Silverado. You and I are not particularly large Chevy fans, to say the least. And, you know, they sell a lot of these, and I can, honestly, driving this vehicle is where it excels. The powertrain in this Chevy product is extremely impressive. When it works, this 5.3 is alarmingly quick for how big this product is. It's in the low 6s to 60. It is a effortless power band. Unlike the 5-liter on the Ford, you don't have to wind this thing out. It makes power everywhere. And it returns reasonable fuel economy. That made it with this 10-speed, which in the Chevy I think is far better tuned than it is in the Ford, makes for a pretty impressive powertrain, and that's really the high point of this vehicle.
So how does it compare to the Ram 1500 then?
Well, because this is the 5.3 offered on the Trail Boss versus the 6.2 liter, it is not as powerful. But I do think it's smoother. It doesn't have quite the same level of NVH, but then again, the Ram does sound substantially better than this 5.3, and you agree with me, don't you?
Yeah, the engine is really smooth in here, and it's almost not like, it doesn't have the sounds a little bit like a V8, but it has more of the smoothness of a V6, and compared to the Hemi definitely has more induction noise, and the 5-liter in the F-150 has a ton of character, but like you were talking about, you have to really wind that out.
And which in a truck, right, I mean, you're buying this, most people are buying this as a daily that they, do work projects with. And in that regards, I think this better suits the character of the truck. When it comes to driving dynamics, and yes, saying that you have a sporty truck is like saying you have a sporty house. It's not it's not why anyone buys this thing. But I think compared to the Ford, at least, it has better initial turn and better steering. But it is nowhere as comfortable as the Ram, particularly when you compare that thing with optional air ride.
So let me ask you this. Where we are currently and where my shop is at, you have Johnny Diesel, all these guys driving F-250s, F-350s, dualies as a daily driver. I 100% do not understand the concept of driving these around. In the case of the Silverado and the Ram 1500 and the F-150, they're more in the competition now of creating better daily drivers. And this is probably the farthest behind the Ford and the Ram in terms of ride quality and refinement.
I totally agree. Yes, this is the Trail Boss, but we just had the Ram Rebel, which is the direct competitor to this, and it is rides better. The seats are way better than this. The interior on the Ford is still better than this. Yes, it doesn't have I don't think the powertrain is not as good, but it's more livable than this is. This is by far the bottom of the domestic big three pickup trucks. They sell a lot of these, but...
Yeah, at this point, I mean, the drivetrain, though, I think that's where it's which is surprising for a Chevy, but their drivetrain is really good in here. It feels great. But everything else, so far, I'm not all that impressed with it compared to the others.
I'll floor it again. I mean, I don't think we're going to persuade a lot of buyers not to buy this thing, right? They sell over 1 million in the last 2 years. It is an astronomical number of vehicles to move. And trucks are like religions, like we talked about during the Ram launch. But I do think it's worth cross-shopping now. Trucks are as good as they've ever been. It's a very competitive marketplace, and unless you are really sold on this V8 offering or the 6.2 and that you can get in this Trail Boss, which I have to imagine is extremely impressive, there's not a lot of reasons to buy this over the Ram or the Ford.
Like we talked about in the shop, with some of the engine deficiencies and the problems, you could tell somebody that is dead set on buying a Chevy and they wouldn't care. And there is this religious factor too, and brand bias towards certain people that will only buy one model. But we're looking at, how much is this?
$54,000.
And this isn't even a top trim.
Nope.
So when you get to this price tag, given the economy and what the economy is going to become, $54,000 is absolutely insane. And if you're going to spend that and you're okay with spending it, you at least better go out and drive the competition. And I don't care if you're a Chevy, Ford, or whatever you are, definitely drive all of them, because I feel like this is good in some ways and not so good in other ways.
I couldn't agree more.
Final thoughts on the Chevrolet Silverado, the Trail Boss, and its lovely V8 options. One of the best parts about driving the Silverado is how smooth, quiet, and refined the engine tuning is. It provides great power and adequate power all throughout the rev range, and the torque is excellent down low and up high. You don't have to wind this out as much as the 5-liter in the Mustang, and it feels way more balanced than what you get out of the Hemi equivalent. The 10-speed automatic is also very good here. The programming is so good you don't notice it most of the time. The only complaints really are cylinder deactivation. It changes the transmission tuning. It can make it feel more herky-jerky. But the overall driving experience is the most truckish of all three brands, Ford, FCA, and Chevy. You still get a very truckish, harsh ride out of this compared to the other two brands. That takes me to the negatives. That's a negative in terms of driving every day. The interior is definitely number 3. It's got the worst interior of the 3 in terms of build quality, plastics, overall fit and finish, and the biggest things, I could forgive all that, but the seats in here are just mass transit. They feel like something you'd get in a bus or a train. They're very hard. The materials are bad. They're big, but you don't get comfortable in them. But the main highlight, the biggest reason why you would choose the Silverado, is the overall change in engineering. It's far more competitive with what Ford is trying to do with their body structures. It's lighter, the use and decreased use of certain materials, the spread of aluminum, high-strength steels. The structure is far better than it used to be, and the benefits are going to be noticed when you're truly using this to tow, haul. Things like the bed design. They've used less space, and you still get more usable space out of it. It's very clever in that regard. The last thing I will say, and I don't want to beat a dead horse with this, you got to have a drivetrain warranty past 60,000 miles. If you're going to buy this truck new, you need to have a warranty on the engine and transmission to 100,000 miles based on their previous problems with active fuel management or cylinder deactivation. You do not want to be caught burning oil, burning up motors, and then being stuck with it like so many people are. With that said, I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.